Members, the next item on the order paper is a motion on a strategic framework for a shared future. I will ask the clerk to read the motion.
That this Assembly recognises the ongoing need to build a genuinely shared future, expresses concern at the ongoing and severe costs, both social and financial, of continued social and economic segregation, notes the value of increasing numbers of people now enjoying educational, sporting and career opportunities free from the confines of traditional community divisions, further recognises the need to expand these opportunities to the entire community, including by ensuring that public money is spent on delivery of public services that are open to all, rather than on maintaining or further embedding division, and calls on the First Minister and Deputy First Minister to bring forward a strategic framework for a shared future, delivering public sector reform to tackle the costs of division while building on good relations work already undertaken.
Thank you, and I call Paula Bradshaw to move the motion.
So moved.
Thank you. The Business Committee has agreed to allow up to 1 hour 30 minutes for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 10 minutes to propose and 10 minutes to wind. All other speakers will have 5 minutes. Please open the debate on the motion.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to propose the motion. As I do so, I wish to be clear that this is in many ways a positive motion, which much of which I say will be reflecting on significant progress which has been made in our society since the Good Friday Agreement, even if it has often been in spite of rather than because of the endless challenges the political institutions founded by that agreement have had to endure. Indeed, in many ways, the argument my colleagues and I will be making today is that politics needs to catch up with society. As we plan our programme for government and budget, we still need to think about the potential for a fourth pillar to the three that are in existence: planet, people and prosperity, and we would like to see peace added to that. This motion, which I hope will secure cross-party support, will require the First Minister and Deputy First Minister to take forward the development of a shared future strategic framework. This would require each department to develop and deliver its services and programmes in ways that ensures that they reflect the need to prioritise and promote peace and reconciliation, and meaningfully challenge and tackle the cost of division. Part of the story we set out today will be about great progress, great advance and great opportunity. Part of it will also be about the ongoing scars in our society and about the many communities which have not fully benefited from that progress. These scars are sometimes literal in our built environment, most obviously in the form of the so-called peace walls, which were supposed to all have been brought down by last year. But we should not forget that the cost in lost progress and lost opportunity is borne not by infrastructure but by people. A genuinely shared future, to be clear, is not a neutral future where we are afraid to express ourselves. On the contrary, it is where one can express their cultural heritage with confidence, and where we are not confined to one side of the sectarian fault line in seeking out opportunities to express ourselves. It is one in which the drummer in the band parade offers up an opportunity to play the drum to a young lad coming home from GAA training. It is one in which Irish language classes take place in inner city East Belfast. It is one in which the same person vies to play on the county panel in the summer and on the provincial team in the winter. The point is that all of this already happens, and I firmly believe that it happens considerably more than it did. This is our shared present. We just need a lot more of it. In many communities, however, segregation remains a way of life. T-Buck has been of value to many such communities, but it has perhaps at times been too programmatic, focused on local interventions in areas which then become reliant on this short-term funding, rather than on a strategic policy overview in terms of public sector delivery, which would make the fundamental and necessary changes needed in how our society as a whole functions. And I'll just draw reference to an example in my own constituency, where one of our local youth clubs has had its budget, been advised that its budget's going to be severely reduced this year. You know, we know that these are the very structures through which good relations work can be delivered. And so if we stop duplicating our services, then this would free up money for long-term, frontline, sustained delivery. And as I say, We could quote the literal cost of segregation. As long ago as 2007, a Deloitte report put it at 1.5 billion, and certainly no one would seriously dispute that it certainly runs into hundreds of millions. This is a financial cost. It effectively comes off money which, as I've just said there, could be spent on efficient public services, particularly in those areas that need it most. However, perhaps the biggest issue is the social cost. Those communities in which fear of different identities or outlook prevails are also the ones in which living standards and life expectancies tend to be lower, often markedly so. Overcoming that fear and embracing opportunity is not an easy task, but if it leads to communities more open to the opportunities offered by diversity, then it will surely lead to communities which are happier, healthier and more prosperous. We need to find ways to focus on the opportunities which arise if we bring down the walls, both literal and metaphorical, which divide us. When we live with walls for generation, they inevitably become the norm. But we must never stop reinforcing the point that dividing communities with walls is abnormal. The Peace Monitoring Report published in November 2023 notes that intercommunal violence is now extremely rare, and so what we do need to do is address the fear that many people still live with. A strategic framework could help by delivering policy outcomes such as, for example, improving air quality and increasing levels of economic opportunities in urban areas, which would reduce fear by bringing communities together across walls with common cause. And we feel that this strategic framework should sit with the First Minister and Deputy First Minister because of their coordination role in the need for cross-departmental outcomes and outworkings. So we must also confront the reality that there are still communities that live in pre-1998 existence in single identity areas, often sadly complete with paramilitary trappings, where children and young people continue, even in 2024, to be exploited, and sadly we saw this in Derry just over Easter. This motion asks this Assembly, however, to confirm its determination that moving on from this type of existence everywhere is a good thing. We must no longer allow anywhere to settle from breeding fear and limiting future prospects. The mixing of our population and the growing presence of newcomers and their families has changed the face of Northern Ireland. The surveys show that it is widely recognised that it has done so for the better. With diversity comes opportunity. And again, the recent Peace Monitoring Report makes clear that the greatest growth in prejudice is not along sectarian lines but along racial. Race is now the most common form of crime with hate motivation, and most people reported to the Northern Ireland Life and Time survey in 2022 that they felt that there is much or more racial prejudice now than 5 years ago. Yet our racial equality strategy, another example where there is need for cross-departmental cooperation and collaboration, this has not been fully implemented just 1 year from its conclusion, and we remain the only part of the UK without a final refugee integration strategy. There is learning not just from TBUC but also from the original Shared Future Policy dating from 2005. That policy sets as its objective the establishment over time of a normal civic society in which all individuals are considered as equals, where differences are resolved through dialogue in the public sphere, and where all people are treated impartially, and thus of a society where there is equity, respect for diversity, and a recognition of interdependence. That objective still holds true today, and it still holds true for tackling all forms of prejudice and discrimination. That is why the motion calls specifically for a strategic framework. We want to see policies delivered and developed through co-design and in a cohesive way, so that that commitment to a shared future, free from prejudice, while maximising opportunity, is woven into everything our executive parties do going forward. I hope, however, that I've set out the many benefits to us all of building a shared future, overcoming segregation and ending prejudice, building on work already undertaken. Yet I think we still do need that fourth pillar, as I say: planet, people, prosperity and peace. Therefore, I urge all members to back the motion to replace a bitter, fearful and divided past with a reconciled, hopeful and shared future that is led by all our executive ministers under a strategic framework. Thank you.
Thank the member for opening the debate, and I call Carol McCullen.
An chola agus gom buhis a horch don alliance ar fian round tabatacht Marial Arshin, Bawailam Takiak the Horch, Dunroon. So I want to thank the Alliance for bringing this very important motion forward, and I want to give my support to that motion. There's lots that we could say, and within 10 minutes you kept yourself into, fairly confined words. And, for us, I think, first of all, there are a couple of things that we need to discuss, and it is the elephant in the room. There is still sectarianism out there, so we agree on that. I also think that there's a lot of focus on sectarianism, particularly within working class areas and deprived areas. We recognise all that, but we also need to deal with the middle class sectarianism that has went on for a long time as well. So first of all, I want to put on record my thanks to the many people throughout all sorts of years have continued to show leadership in interfaces. I also want to talk about the elephant in the room, particularly when we're talking about tackling paramilitaries and communities in transition. In the area I represent, it's armed criminal gangs. And we need to call that out as well. Do they still have the ability to coerce and control young people and cause sectarian problems? They absolutely do. So, and I've seen it there as recent as a couple of weeks ago in North Belfast, regrettably. But see the children and young people who are involved in youth work, the residents who are involved in youth work, they're doing it together. Now, they may do a single identity work, but when it comes to evaluating, it comes to making sure there's enough staff on, making sure there's enough diversion of youth workers on, they're doing that together, and that's something that is greatly appreciated, but I also think it's worth putting it on the record, and that's right across the communities. I've seen it myself. Young people are taking risks when there's a lack of political leadership, and they have continued to do it, and they will continue to do it, and I think what we need to do is continue their footing. That's the very, very least. We all need to review what's going to happen for good relations or whatever. I also think the economic impacts are there as well. So if without TBUC, without CIT, without engaged programmes, there is still an extreme vulnerability, particularly for some young people, to get involved in the criminal justice system. And there it goes on, and it becomes intergenerational and harder to crack. What I've seen this last lot of years compared to what I've seen previous years are that people are doing this. So well before we were talking about co-design and co-production, they were doing it. So in your speech you said communities are often ahead of us as political leaders. They've been doing this for quite some time. I want to mention North Belfast. We had the regrettable interface right down a park. Right? Now it's opened up. It opened up, and I remember David Ford being there, and in fairness he recognised the communities, but in my opinion the communities weren't recognised enough by officials then. It was the communities who took the risks. It was the communities who went and spoke to their neighbours, spoke to the youth groups, spoke to the mother and toddler groups, went to the libraries and worked really, really hard to get that done. And they're doing the same thing in Gertwood, they're doing the same thing in North Queen Street, Dunkern Gardens, Limestone Road, Clifton Street. Unfortunately, there's about 8 interfaces. Before them are still particularly problematic. And Brian knows this. They're problematic because you have a small cohort of young people who are determined to cause trouble. But overarching, this sense of a need for better funding into good relations, for me, is the elephant in the room. And we need to mop all that up from different departments and give good leadership in this. Because what we're saying is, to those areas in particular, we see you, we know who you are, we value you, we want to be productive in this change that comes forward, and we want to do it together, and above all else we'll listen to you. So I'm delighted just to say a few words on this. It's really, really important. But the need for a bespoke service doesn't come from community relations, doesn't come from anybody else, it comes from the ground up, and they've got it. So let's recognise that when we are looking at funding going forward, and not only congratulate their achievements thus far, but make it easier for them to do the work, really hard work on our behalf. Gormila, thank you.
Thank you, and I call Harry Harvey.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to speak on this motion here today. The motion calls firstly on the House to recognise the ongoing need to build a genuinely shared future. Many of us in this chamber have been committed to playing our part to see a shared future become a reality for many years. The DUP is focused on making Northern Ireland work for everyone. We're committed to a shared future and to playing our part to build that shared future, provided it acknowledges and caters for all our communities and identities across Northern Ireland. Unfortunately, on occasion, the genuineness and sincerity of some rings hollow in relation to shared futures, when it becomes apparent that their concept of a shared future seems to be to freeze out those with whom they disagree or those who don't fit their narrative. If we want to see a genuine shared future, it must be a future which celebrates, acknowledges and caters for everyone. Community integration can only be achieved through natural permeation. It is a community that integrates, and whilst government can provide tools and mechanisms to support the creation and strengthening of social cohesion across traditional tribalism, it cannot engage in the business of integration itself, nor should it seek to force artificially contrived notions of integration upon society. If we mean to be genuinely realistic around this subject and not bandy it about as a fashionable vote winner, then we need to acknowledge that a shared future doesn't equate to a one-size-fits-all policy. Take education, for example. There is a reluctance by many to recognise that natural integration within the controlled sector, and in particular the grammar sector, is just as favourable as that found in the integrated sector. Some would have us believe that integration doesn't happen outside of the integrated sector, an insult to so many schools across Northern Ireland that are often more integrated and diverse in their intake than many integrated schools. The idea that... Yes, just a wee second. The idea that parental choice can be set aside in favour of one elected, elevated sector is wrong. Okay, go ahead.
I just want to ask, parental choice though isn't there for the parents who wish to send their children to integrated schools because there aren't any available for them. But would the member not also agree that given the schools that you speak about that are integrated in nature, then there is nothing to fear in actual undergoing that true transformation to become an integrated school?
Thank the member and welcome our intervention and our comments. Thank you. Returning to the wording on the motion, which acknowledges those who enjoy educational, sporting and career opportunities free from the confines of community divisions, and recognising the need to expand these opportunities to the entire community. The motion intimates that there are some for whom such opportunities cannot be accessed. I would be interested to know to who and what this refers, given that we live in a free country and individuals are at liberty to study where they wish, work where they wish, and enjoy whatever leisure activities they wish. Similarly, they also have the ability and opportunity to enjoy cultural and identity-based pursuits. The motion appears to cite the example of public services that are not open to all in justification of this argument. This is very alarming, and inference to make of this believed to be the case, then those making the inference should spell out what public services they are referring to and whether they have raised these inequalities with the Equality Commission. Oh, well.
Thank you for the opportunity. I thought I spelt quite a bit of it out, but I suppose like an example I would give is that there's a new housing development, for example, in my constituency that went for shared housing funding and got turned down. So there's very practical examples of where funding has not been given forward, where people wanted to progress good relations and shared future. Thank you.
I've got an extra minute.
Welcome the members' comments. The key to building a sustainable and lasting shared future will not be found in attacking someone's freedom to choose, maintain and develop their own identity. In recent decades, we have welcomed many thousands of migrants to the UK to work and live, bringing with them an eclectic array of cultures, religions and traditions. We call this diversity, not division. There should be no difference in how we view our domestic cultures. Our shared future can and should celebrate such diversity as it is intrinsic to our identity. As we continue to transition as a post-conflict society, there are undoubtedly areas in which needless financial and social segregation can and should be combated. This can be achieved with community buy-in through a bottom-up approach which achieves tangible results. We should be focusing on what we can do to build upon the foundations already laid and what has been successful in the past in terms of future government-led initiatives.
The member brings remarks to close.
Yep, well, that'd be a revamp of urban villages and building successful community schemes. Okay, thank you.
Thank the member. Mike Nesbitt.
Deputy Speaker, thank you very much. Just while it's on my mind, before I forget, Carol McKillen made reference to middle-class sectarianism, which I think is an important issue to be debated. And I'm not sure if she's ever read John Hewitt's fabulous poem, The Coasters, but I think if she did, it will speak very much to her theme, and I have a spare copy if she's interested. I want to begin with our foundational document, the 1998 agreement, and quote paragraphs 2 and 3. Paragraph 2 talks about the tragedies of the past, leaving a deep and profoundly regrettable legacy of suffering, and the fact we must never forget, but we can best honour through a fresh start in which we firmly dedicate ourselves to the achievement of reconciliation, tolerance and mutual trust, and to the protection and vindication of the human rights of all. And paragraph 3 is a commitment to partnership, equality and mutual respect. And I think those concepts, partnership, equality and mutual respect, acknowledge the fact that we have different identities which we cherish. So this is not about everybody jumping into the equivalent of a virtual blender and coming out the human form of beige. Republicans will be Republicans, nationalists will be nationalists, and unionists will be unionists, and those who don't want to be labelled as such will not be labelled as such. And without getting too far up on my hobby horse, if we are having a review of the agreement, I think we need to define what we mean by reconciliation. I think we need to find another word to replace tolerance, which for me is simply about the absence of hostility. I think it needs to be something a bit more positive. And we need to find another term for others, because I think that's demeaning to the Alliance Party, given their current level of support. In terms of division, I reported on far too much of the troubles as a broadcast journalist. Politicians coming in to bemoan the fact we were a divided society. The one shining example of difference was the leader of the SDLP, John Hume, who didn't talk about division, he talked about diversity. Diversity being a strength, diversity being part of the human condition. And I think that's what we need to focus on in this debate and in the work we perform on the rest of this mandate. The mover talked about putting a duty on each department to look at this. I would be more comfortable if it was an executive-led initiative. My fear would be that we might repeat what I consider to be mistakes from the last mandate. We had, for example, for communities, an initiative on shared housing, but at the same time the Department of Education had an initiative of shared education. The problem was, geographically, they were separate. Surely it would make much more sense if the shared housing was surrounding the shared educational campuses. And I don't think it should be about a son of the Social Investment Fund, that 40 million for dereliction and 40 million for deprivation. I think that was perceived too often to be an orange and green carve-up. So I think we can learn from what we've done in the past and do it better in the future. I've been here 13 years, Deputy Speaker. I sense something different in the air. I sense a positivity that I haven't really felt before. I sense a determination to deliver that I haven't felt before. I sense possibilities that I haven't felt before. Possibilities to truly deliver for all our people, to look at this place that we all call home, and to respect each other's differences, each other's identity, and to find many common causes. So I'm very happy to support the thrust of this motion.
Thank you. And I call Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Myself and the SDLP will, of course, be supporting today's motion from the Alliance Party, and I commend them for bringing it. There are a few points that I want to make in respect of both the motion but also the broad theme of reconciliation and moving our society away from division. The work of ending division is core to my party. The previous speaker, Mr. Nesbitt, talked about our former leader. We sometimes talk about our former leader, the SDLP, Mr. Hume. We're sometimes accused of talking about him too much, but what he left with us as a moral, intellectual and political North Star was, among other things, a belief that difference and diversity must not and should not become a source of division. Of course, we know in this part of Ireland, difference has been a source of division and sadly continues to be. Our core mission is ending division, ending all the divisions in this place, in Northern Ireland and on the island of Ireland, and in the different ways that they manifest themselves. When I returned to this place to become a politician 4 years ago. I'd been away for nearly 20 years. I'm, I suppose, part of the Good Friday Agreement generation. I'm never entirely clear where those generations begin or end, but I was 15 when the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and I'm a middle-aged man now. I was out of this island for nearly 20 years. When I returned, I was, and I would obviously return regularly, but when I moved back here, I was struck by some of the individual bits of discrete progress that had been made. I was proud to be representing probably the most diverse constituency on this island, the most shared, which is South Belfast. But I was also struck by the many ways that division continued to plague and define the society. And we should be honest about that, and we should be direct about it, because sectarianism continues to be extraordinarily defining in this society. And I think sometimes it's important not to minimise it and not to pretend that it doesn't exist. Carol McCullen was right, actually, when she said that there is sometimes a tendency to pretend or to imply that sectarianism is something, either something that them do, but not us, or indeed that it's something that plagues or affects working class communities and that others don't need to deal with it. That simply isn't true. So division is profound, deep and defining in this society. But what do we mean by a strategic framework for a shared future? We are happy to support the motion, because I think it is important that this is a core priority for the new executive, and I hope that the passage of this motion today means that there will be specific commitments in the new programme for government around delivery. I do have to touch briefly on something that has been very disappointing so far in relation to building a shared future that has happened under this new dispensation, which is the cut to integrated education funding. The UK government removed a ring fence which has affected 10 integrated and shared projects, but particularly 10 integrated schools who had expected to have new schools built and now won't. It's important to say that though the UK government removed the ring fence, that did not impose any duty on any executive minister to not spend that money. They could have put the ring fence back on for those integrated schools a minute later, but they chose not to. I have written answers from both the Education Minister and the Finance Minister, which appear to say different things about when they were formally told that shared and integrated education funding had been cut. What is clear to the Minister was that it was known by mid-February by both the Finance Department and the Education Department that this funding was going to be cut, but it wasn't. The schools themselves were not told until a week later. In the interim, there was a visit, including by the First and Deputy First Minister and the Education Minister, to a new shared education project in Limavady. I think that's a great project, by the way, and I don't in any way diminish its importance. But there are concerns about the timing of that announcement and the fact that ministers appeared to know that this money was going to be cut from integrated schools, but went along to dig ground at Limavady in the shared education project. I say that because it's important that the reason I make that point, and we will follow up on that, is that we need to be serious and specific, and we need to be real about delivery when it comes to building a shared future and not simply be indulging in photo ops. I want to briefly, before I close my remarks, I've only got 10 seconds left, Mr. Deputy Speaker. All of us who have a constitutional aspiration, whether that's Northern Ireland remaining in the UK or in New Ireland, need to be able to explain how our vision for the future will involve ending division and building a reconciled society, and that isn't impossible. But I commend today's motion. I'm pleased to support it, and I hope we see real delivery in a programme for government. Thank you very much.
Thank the member and call Patrick Delargy.
Firstly, I think this motion is useful in assessing where we're at and in assessing where we're going. So I thank the Alliance Party for bringing forward the motion. I want to touch specifically on a few elements and really look at how they've impacted practically within my constituency and look at how there's still space to develop and improve upon those. So that's really within the T-Box strategy. It's around education and it's around urban villages as well. There are obviously the 7 strands of T-Book that are funded by the executive. 30,000 young people, including a huge number of young people from my own constituency who have taken part and who've benefited from that. And I think within that, what is very clear and what all those young people have experienced is around how, as a society, to move forward, we need to tackle sectarianism, we need to tackle racism, and we need to tackle other forms of intolerance which we see. But critically, as Carol has mentioned, it's about that being on the ground. And I think from a policy level, while we can support that and implement that and bring forward strategies which really benefit that, it has to come organically from communities as well, and it has to be supported from a political position to support that as well. Obviously, as a former teacher, most of my experience prior to coming on here was within education. I was privileged to teach in an integrated school in Oak Grove in Derry, and to see the huge benefits in that school to the community, and to really see how practically on a day-to-day basis that school work at breaking down barriers and at breaking down divisions. So I think that's something very positive. We've seen hugely positive developments in terms of the Stroll campus and, as Mr. O'Toole has mentioned, in Limavady as well. 4,000 pupils on the Stroll campus. So I welcome that as a really positive step forward, but I do recognise within that there are huge steps that we need to continue to do. For me in all of this, we need to bank what we've had that's positive, but also to review what needs to change in the time ahead, and I think that's critical. In that, I think the motion, and Ms Bradshaw has spoken to that very, very well, but I definitely think there's space still for us to do that. Importantly to me in all of this, it's about us working collectively and about us continuing to have these conversations in a positive and constructive way to assess what is going well and what we need to change. In terms of urban villages, I come from an urban village area myself in the Moor in Derry. We've seen really positive development on that. And in the Fountain, we've seen the Newgate Arts Centre, we've seen the redevelopment of the city centre, the city walls, and then in the areas that I come from, we've also seen the redevelopment of Meanan Square and of Central Drive in Craigan. So again, I think one of the biggest things that Urban Villages has brought forward, and which we need to continue to bring into other communities, is that in tackling sectarianism and in tackling that intolerance, we've also managed, by doing so, to tackle some of the economic disparity that we've seen across the north as well. So I think fundamental to this is looking at that whole socio-economic piece around that as well. So I welcome that, and I recognise that that's very much part of the motion. But the reality is that while we look at all that and we look at the benefits, we still have peace walls up within that area as well. And that's something which has been alluded to already. So we can't stand still. I think that this is a great opportunity, and I welcome the fact you've brought it forward today. I'll be supporting it. But it's a great opportunity for us to evaluate where we're at going forward, how we get to the stage of moving that into communities. And communities are, I agree, well ahead of us. I've spoken to a number of people within my own area and within areas across the Moor who are very much willing to move to the next step and look at where we can go going forward. So I think this is about building relationships. It's about reducing that duplication of services. It's about us working together here in Stormont, but about us working together in our communities. One element of it which the motion hasn't really touched on, but which I think we need to expand this out to, is tackling division not just within our communities, but tackling division across our island as well. So particularly for myself being in a border constituency, one of the key divisions which I see, one of the key duplications of services which I see, is the fact that we're divided across the island. So I would like to, I suppose, continue to have those conversations collectively and develop that element of it as well. But I welcome the motion today. I'll be supporting it. I'm looking forward to working with the Alliance Party and with others in developing this in the time ahead.
Thank you. And call Brian Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. A shared future for the people of Northern Ireland is something that I trust we are all committed to in this Assembly. Indeed, it is a key theme of the Assembly Executive. For example, in the Executive Office with programmes such as Together, Building a United Community, Urban Villages and Communities in Transition. It is also facilitated by many other executive departments, including the Department for Education, through shared education initiatives, which many schools participate in. Also, the Department for Communities, through the collaborative working which takes place between communities through programmes such as Neighbourhood Renewal. The DUP recognises that a shared future does not mean trying to do away with personal, family and community identities. Rather, it means promoting tolerance. It means recognising the place of a range of identities and people's right to choose to associate themselves or not associate themselves with any particular identity. In education, we respect parental choice and that there are a number of sectors within our school system resulting from that. Those schools must be of a viable size in the interest of the public purse. It is not just the integrated sector, which contains schools having a diverse enrolment. In particular, many schools in the grammar sector and the controlled sector have diverse enrolments across a range of community and ethnic backgrounds. Statutory services must be open and accessible to all, and in particular for lower income families, which are likely to be more reliant on public services. Importantly, this does not mean that public services should not be located in areas which are predominantly associated with one side of the community in Northern Ireland. Such an approach, if services were removed, could compound disadvantage through reducing the uptake of public services. So the DUP certainly supports a shared future. We are committed to investing and transforming our public services to ensure that they are accessible by everyone. However, we need an approach to this debate in a way which is respectful and tolerant of the many national and cultural identities in communities across Northern Ireland. Community engagement is central to building a shared and inclusive future. Without community buy-in, this transition simply isn't feasible. So, passing motions in this Assembly can be very detached from realities on the ground. Over many years, I have worked with community and elected representatives and statutory services in Greater Shankill and North Belfast to improve community relations and to address periods of increased tension when there have been clashes and attacks, as sadly has been the case recently. So, as Carol Nahulan did earlier, I wish to pay tribute to those community and elected representatives and statutory services who work on these difficult issues on the ground and who make a genuine difference at community level, particularly for those living in interface areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Connie Egan.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm glad to be speaking on the motion before us today, particularly as it calls for the development of a cross-departmental shared future strategy. My and my party's vision of a shared future is one where everyone can be safe, play their part and is treated fairly and with respect. We believe in a society for everyone, underpinned by our shared values of equality, respect, and for diversity and interdependence. People must be free from intimidation, discrimination, and fear. As well as the societal impact of division in a post-conflict society, there's also a huge financial cost. My colleague has already highlighted the Deloitte report from 2007, which estimated the division was costing Northern Ireland between 800 million and 1.5 billion per year. Research produced more recently, last year by Ulster University, estimated that the education system alone, the cost of division is costing us £226 million per year, £600,000 every day. This is a staggering sum, but it's not just about the financial cost, it's about the societal impact that this division has on Northern Ireland as a whole. I'd also at this point like to highlight and come back to some comments that have been made previously about where facilities and provision aren't open to all. I think it was shameful that previous executives did not act on the Fair Employment Treatment Order not applying to teachers. That's a clear, tangible example of where people could be discriminated against and have no legal protections. I welcome that my former colleague from the Alliance Party, Chris Little, brought forward a private member's bill to address this, and it will come into force, I understand, later this year. But I think it is disappointing that the executive themselves couldn't take that forward. I do believe significant change is needed to reduce the impact of division in our society. This cannot be the responsibility of one department, which is why we're calling on the First and Deputy First Minister to lead on a strategy to embed sharing, integration and cohesion across all departments and public services. I do, however, recognise that to move forward, we must not forget about the past. There is much work we still need to do to progress and address our history in Northern Ireland. I would like to see the sectarian demarcation of areas with flags, murals and banners that promote prescribed paramilitary organisations fully outlawed, with legislation to ensure removal by public bodies. We also have a Legacy Act introduced against the will of the parties in Northern Ireland and overwhelmingly opposed by victims and survivors themselves. The mechanisms contained in this Act do not put the needs of victims first, and it will not lead to a more reconciled society. I would also like to see this executive take forward proposals for a pension for those bereaved by the Troubles. We have seen many families fall between the cracks and left disappointment that their trauma and pain has not been recognised by previous payment schemes brought forward. In terms of the here and now, I recognise that work is being done in communities to promote cohesion and integration. In North Down, my own constituency, I've seen firsthand some of the good work funded by the Communities in Transition project in Kilcully and Rathgill. I would, however, say for going forward, I would like to see these projects be a lot more flexible. Unfortunately, many in North Down will tell you that paramilitary activity is not just limited to these two estates in Bangor, and it is important that initiatives from the executive reflect that. It has been said by other colleagues here, but I think it is important to recognise that our local communities are way ahead of politicians on this issue. The best examples of community cohesion and inclusive initiatives are more often than not driven by local people in the local areas. Things such as youth workers and the provision they provide, women's centres and mental health initiatives on the ground.
Would the member give way?
Yes, I will give way.
Would the member agree with me that if we address the cost of division, there would be more money for sustained services in those communities that you've just outlined?
I thank the member for intervention. I would agree, and I think there is a body of evidence to suggest and back up those claims. Moving towards a truly shared and integrated society, I want to see us move beyond the old narrative of two communities here in Northern Ireland. We are a diverse place and becoming more increasingly so. It is important that equality and human rights issues are an essential part of a shared future. It is regrettable that more progress was not made on the last mandate on a Bill of Rights for Northern Ireland. This could have been an important tool to enshrine rights for all and ensure those who are marginalised are protected. Going forward, I want a shared future to mean a society where everyone is welcome and free from discrimination. I am extremely concerned by the recent rise in hate crimes recorded by the PSNI with race as the motivator. Addressing hate crime needs to be a factor in building a shared society and a united community. Good relations, as I said, should no longer be about the old narrative of two communities, but for everybody in society. I would like to see this underpinned with a strategy for the integration of refugees into our society and fully implementing the racial equality strategy. This issue affects our entire society and as such there's many issues that I would like to speak about, but I am running out of time. Before I bring my remarks to a close, I would also like to say I think it would also be important when it comes to human rights and inclusion that the UN Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities is incorporated into domestic law. This is about creating a framework for a shared and united Northern Ireland, addressing our past to create a society where everyone is equal and free from discrimination. Thank you.
And thank you. I call in Michelle.
Corlia, and I rise in support of the motion today, and I congratulate the Alliance Party for bringing it. I think this is a really important conversation for us to have, and as has previously been said, it's really useful that we take stock of where we are in the North as we are a post-colonial, post-conflict society, and we have to acknowledge that sectarianism does exist, and we're only going to deal with it if we have a conversation about it. So I totally support the motion. Obviously, unity and unification is fundamental to my politics. I'm an Irish Republican. We've just celebrated Easter, and at Easter we reflect on the words of the proclamation to the Irish people in 1916, in which it clearly stated that the Irish nation was for Catholic, Protestant and dissenter, and that's the politics to which I align myself, and I suppose the basis of my political activism and the reason why I'm here in this chamber. And we know that the costs of division are multiple. They're visceral, they're visible, they're tangible, and they're very real. And unfortunately, in the past, people have paid the ultimate price because of division and sectarianism. And that is not the place that we're in anymore, but we want to move very much away from that. And I think motions like today and this conversation is helpful in that, because we need to govern for everybody. And I note Ms Aiken referred to the Bill of Rights, which in the last mandate we did a lot of work on, and obviously I chaired the ad hoc committee to create a Bill of Rights, and it was regrettable at that point that the two unionist parties did block the delivery of a Bill of Rights, and I would like to see that. Yes, I will.
So the Ulster Unionist Party were anything other than supportive. And you will remember I was vice chair to your chair.
Thanks to the member for his intervention. I can refer you to a body of evidence on the website of this Assembly, which will clearly point the particular meeting where your colleague Alan Chambers provided a document and said verbally that he did not believe a Bill of Rights was necessary for the North, and you can reflect on the Hansard, which will show that and demonstrate that quite clearly. My point is that I think that we have to govern for everybody, and I believe that ensuring rights for everybody is helpful, and I think that's the conversation that's the space that we need to be in, and that's the conversation that we need to be having. And the inclusion of everybody, regardless of their background, is important, and acknowledging those differences and acknowledging that we all have different lived experiences. And I would also say that I think it's been referred to before by others. I believe that there is a change in attitude during this mandate, and I think that's to be welcomed. And we can see that when people participate in other people's cultures and they embrace the fact that we all have differences, and we take the opportunity to enjoy things that we maybe weren't brought up with, that is a richer experience for everyone, and nobody is hurt out of that. So I think that's something that needs to be perpetuated, and it needs to be built upon during this mandate, and I hope to see more of that, and I would congratulate the First and Deputy First Minister for their example of that thus far, because we do need to see an end to segregation in our hearts and in our minds. And I know other members, particularly those from different parts of the city, have referred to the peace walls and the very real divisions within their communities, but as I have said before in this chamber, I am from the country, I'm from a farming family, and where I come from, when there was a cow sick of calving or somebody needed help lambing a sheep, it did not matter what their background was. Nobody asked at the gate, where did you go on Sunday? Everybody chipped in, and that's still the situation at home, and that's something that I think we need to see an increase in, and reflect that people may have different cultural practices, and they may have different political beliefs and different views about the constitutional position of the North of Ireland, but that doesn't mean that they don't have the same worries and concerns. We all want to see the same thing for ourselves, for our families, our friends and our constituents. We want to see people being able to have a full and proper life. We want to see people being able to access healthcare. We all have the same struggles, and at the end of the day, that's what life is about. So I I congratulate you on the motion. I hope to see it receive cross-party support today, and I believe that this is a good basis on which we can all go together and work together for all of the people that we represent. Gormila.
Thank you. I call David Honey first.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I've said before in this chamber that I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for community involvement, and particularly in local sports clubs in Lagan Valley. And I stand as a proud development officer of Glenaby GAC, yet I don't come from a GAA background, nor does my wife or any of her family. And I want to look at now about, Matthew said before he went about getting real, but I want to look at some of the things just around what's happened with myself and what it looks like when you do life together and actually change mindsets. My late granny, she was called Sally. She was pretty loyal, and she was from Ballysillan. She owned a chip shop on the Shankle Road, and when I was young, she used to take me to the band parades. My granny had moved to Bangor as she got older, and she lived at the end of the Fold. And her flat was full of plates of royals, of royal weddings, and anybody that didn't realise her belief, she had a little Union Jack clock on her mantelpiece which ticked as loud as she could speak. So everybody knew exactly where Sally came from. Sundays were a complete day of rest. You did nothing on a Sunday in her house. You didn't wash the car, you didn't cut the grass, that was completely frowned upon. So when my son, her first great-grandson, was about 7 or 8, he was playing in the Sunday Go games at our club in St Joseph's, and we were to visit my granny on that afternoon. And when I told him, I came home from the Go games and I told him to go and get changed so I wouldn't cause her any offence, unknown to me, he'd simply thrown an Irish rugby hoodie over his GAA top. And my granny was getting old, and our flat was really warm all the time. So when we arrived there, Tim was too warm, took off his fleece, and there was a GAA top underneath. 2 sports, 2 Irish teams, and a completely different reaction. My granny was 90-ish at the time, but as quick as a flash, she saw a GAA logo. And I remember seeing the speed at which her eyes locked on that badge. But here's the thing. This was her blue-eyed boy, and he was wearing a GAA shirt. And I kind of will never forget what happened and how that challenged her view and how our reaction was instantly different, because this was her family. This was her grandson, and I'm not saying her opinion completely changed or reversed, but her opposition certainly did. And her perception was completely challenged and was transformed. Her opinion was never going to be challenged by words or press releases or Photoshop or Facebook posts or a shared trip or a visit somewhere that you don't even know where from. But what challenged her was her own grandson, living out a completely different way of life. Uncomfortable, right up close and personal. And while photo opportunities are good to build confidence in this place, and I'm not dismissing that because it is important that that happens, but it's hard decisions that are needed to help challenge and to integrate, to actually unite people. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Member. It just draws the story that you've told there about your grandmother me back to our code of conduct as MLAs, where we are supposed to promote good relations. And this motion brings forward our opportunity to show the public out there that we are, as an assembly together, promoting good relations by coming together in a way that is conducive to promoting good relations, by tackling prejudice, promoting understanding and respect, and encouraging participation.
There's an extra minute.
Yeah, thank you, and thank for the member for Kelly for our words. If we want to live in a place that thrives, that prospers, that celebrates diversity and everyone on this small island, we need more than words and we need more than photographs. We need decisions that will build and bring our community together. Neither should we settle for second best or some sort of false pretense. We can never settle for dividing out or trying to pretend that dividing out is actually sharing. If we want to have a prosperous future, we need to be sharing and a model of confidence, of integration that helps bring people together, that actually then do life together. 25 or 26 years now after the Good Friday Agreement was signed, we need to make decisions to deliver prosperity. And when I say prosperity, I not mean money and wealth and foreign direct investment, although that is part of it. But it's starting to look at the man in the mirror, starting to look at ourselves, and actually making decisions that provide opportunities that build on the work already being done, has been said, across our community, to change and to challenge ourselves. We urgently need a strategic framework brought forward that will work to deliver a shared future, delivering public sector reform, to tackle the cost of division while bringing and building on good relations that are already happening in our community. Talking words are no longer anywhere good enough. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
And thank you. I call Sinead McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this motion and would like to commend those who have brought it forward. And it's actually been a real privilege listening to you, David, giving your personal testimony, because that is where it all happens. It happens with love, you know, sharing our community and that. And I would like to say to Mike as well, I enjoyed that poem. I downloaded it there now. It was very, very good. And it teaches us all something about our own humanity as well. It's timely and appropriate motion about one of the most pressing challenges facing our society, namely the unacceptable division that still separates our communities here in Northern Ireland. When our peace agreement was finalised in 1998, it was in the hope for a better future for everyone here. And that was the real and earnest desire of those who took part in those negotiations. But 26 years later, although that fragile peace has survived, I think we can all agree that our society has not lived up to the vision of the peace builders of all those years ago. Of course, it's right to say that there are increasing numbers of people from all backgrounds engaging in forms of sports and culture that were once thought as reserved for the so-called opposite community, and that is to be welcomed. And through a combination of natural integration and the fact that more and more people are simply fed up with division, many people are living lives in our communities that would have seemed unimaginable just a few decades ago. The old divisions no longer hold as true as they once did, and we can all see that our society is changing all around us. That includes the fact that we are home to an increasing number of new communities from around the world. That diversity is to be celebrated, and it is a sign of Northern Ireland that now looks different from our past. However, it is also right to recognise that in far too many of our communities and for far too many of our people, the scars of the past and present division is still very clear. And reconciliation was never supposed to be an event that happened in 1998, but a process that continues throughout the years that have followed. Despite the huge popular support for integration, we still know that it's not the reality on the ground. Lip service has been paid to integrated education, but let's be honest, we are fooling nobody. Only 7% of our young people are enrolled in integrated schools. The vast majority of children still grow up without the opportunity to experience an environment that is unlike their own. And while integrated education should be high on the agenda, in practice, at least 10 of our integrated schools have lost their funding in the funding deal to restore these institutions. And more than 44% of people here say relationships between Protestants and Catholics are about the same as they were 5 years ago. And 58% of people have said from different religions using different local services, either a little or a lot of the time. These failures of integration are the consequences of the failure to properly tackle divisions within our communities and within our society. Structural segregation is still the norm in far too many areas of our lives. And we know from research that the divided education system here alone costs £226 million every single year. Tackling these costs of division may be framed by some as another pressure on budgets that are already under huge pressure. But we must recognise that the kind of shared framework that this motion calls for is an investment in the future that we all want to see. We need to recognise that every day the running of parallel services in different communities costs our public purse. The cost of division is profound. But it's also important to recognise the cost of division between the north and south of this island. Running parallel services between north and south also holds our community back and our economy back. So there is actually two barriers, and the cost of division there needs to be addressed. The first is the barrier between the people here, in the schools, in housing and in our public services. The second is the barrier between the people north and south, and they are not mutually exclusive. We can both reconcile our communities and reconcile the people of this island. Finally, Speaker, although the motion calls for the First and Deputy Minister to bring forward the required strategic framework, breaking down the barriers of segregation and sectarianism is every Minister's responsibility. Thank you.
Thank the member. That concludes the listed speakers. It's now my duty to call the Deputy First Minister to respond, and the Deputy First Minister will have 15 minutes allocated, but hopefully she'll understand if I have to apologetically interrupt for the start of question time at 2 p.m. I call the Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'll just try to speak very, very quickly. I'm grateful to be afforded the opportunity to respond to this motion brought by members. Firstly, may I offer my apologies for being late for the beginning of this debate and missing Ms Bradshaw's contribution. Unfortunately, we were at the North-South Ministerial Council and we did try to get up as quickly as we could, but unfortunately we were late. We should never underestimate or minimise the challenges involved in building a truly reconciled future. But I do want to start off on a positive note by recognising the incredible work that many, many thousands of organisations, people, workers, youth workers, churches, teachers, schools do in this area of building good relations. It really is incredible. I've had a huge privilege of getting out there and speaking to the many people who deliver these projects, sometimes on behalf of the Executive Office, on behalf of the peace programmes and other external funds, and a combination of funding from councils and departments. And it really is incredible. They're doing the work on the cold face, sometimes with the hardest to reach young people or communities, and really producing fabulous and fantastic results. So I want to recognise that, and I want to recognise how far we have come, and I'm going to get to some of the figures arising out of the key TBUC Together Build United community actions. This is an area that I am deeply passionate about. It's an area that I have worked in for many, many years. I had the great privilege as a special advisor of being the policy lead on good relations and had a key role in terms of drafting and supporting the production of Together Build United Community. But in particular, working hand in hand with officials, working hand in hand with officials, we were able to create the signature projects which have now been rolled out. The TBUC strategy is currently under review, and we will be moving, of course, to develop that further. I'll give way.
Giving way. Minister, would you agree with me that whilst those programmes have been very effective, and my background is community development as well, so I do recognise that good work, that what this motion is about embedding good relations, shared future into all our government departments, not just a standalone programme within the Executive Office?
Absolutely, and TBUC is not a standalone project, and just to make that absolutely clear, for example, one of our signature projects was the removal of peace walls, which fell to DOJ, then an Alliance Minister. It was difficult, I have to say, to get the department to take it on at that time, but the point that I said, and I said this directly to the Minister at that time, was that good relations is not an Executive Office, and then OFM, DFM. The Section 75 duty on each and every one of us, on all of the public bodies, it is not just a departmental matter. That Section 75(2) duty is a severable one, and it is a wide one, and it needs to be recognised by all of our public bodies. That said, look, division, poor relations, lack of acceptance and tolerance all bring cost to our society. They limit potential and hold us back from thriving as individuals and as a society. There are many issues, however, in this space where we do agree. We all want our children and young people to grow up safely and with an equal opportunity to achieve our full potential. We want them to be free to embrace and express their own culture, while also being respectful and tolerant of the culture of others. I am somebody who is deeply proud of who I am, and I always say, look, culture is not something I do. Culture is something that I am. In terms of going to the things that express my identity, enjoying the music and the traditions, learning about history and celebrating my identity. A sense of our identity and cultural aspects is something that enriches us as individuals, enriches our families and enriches our communities, and it should be something that is celebrated. And while I am somebody who is deeply proud and confident of who I am, and I want to share that cultural identity with others, I also recognise that I ought to and should and must give that respect to others. It doesn't take away from who I am and what my identity is, or what my heritage and history is, to give that respect to others. And likewise, I demand that respect from others as well. It was these agreed principles that formed the basis of Together Building a United Community strategy, also known as TBUC, which was published in May of 2013. It was significant, and is referenced by Sinead McLaughlin in her remarks, that from 1998 and the signing of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the institutions here had failed to produce a good relations strategy. It was very difficult to get consensus across the parties on that. And in 2007, on the restoration of the Assembly, there was a keenness from the ministers in the then OFM-DFM to get together and produce the first good relations strategy for Northern Ireland. What we had was the Shared Future strategy, and you will be aware that there were criticisms of that strategy. There was a sense, and I liked Mike Nesbitt's reference to the big human blender, that everything was thrown in and what would come out would be beige, that we would need to strip away who we are, what our identities were, hide them away in order to be able to get on. And Together Building a United Community marked a significant change in that, a sense of our celebration and respect for the celebration of those identities. I am deeply proud of what we were able to achieve. I'm very conscious of time, unfortunately. Question time's at 2 o'clock. I'm really proud of what Together Building a United Community has been able to achieve. And I'm not scared to say that I actually feel at times very, very emotional when I see the incredible benefit and change that has brought. 30,000 young people have taken part in more than 900 TBUC camps. And when you go out and you speak to those young people, and you look at the results of how many of those young people have been able to have those robust and enduring relationships beyond that programme, that is the legacy of TBUC. And there was reference made in some of the speeches to the photoshops and getting out there and sending a positive message and that not being good enough. Absolutely, it's not good enough, because what we want to do is deliver. And what TBUC has done has delivered. When I speak to young people about what I'm proudest of in politics, it is the work that I did in this area. It's the lives that have been changed through this programme, the relationships and greater understanding across divisions and across divides. I want us to get to the position where we no longer talk about friendships and relationships and understanding across the divide. We need to just talk about those friendships in Northern Ireland, where our differences are celebrated, that our differences can be a strength. It is not something to be intimidated by, but something to be absolutely celebrated and respected across all aspects, new and old, in terms of our cultural identities here. In terms of other achievements, we have 5 urban village areas that have been established, 2,500 shared homes, 27,000 participants that took part in the United Communities programme of sport and creative events. 7,800 young people have participated in United Youth programme. I could go on, but there was reference made, for example, to the Limavady Shared Education Campus. That wasn't a photo call about digging some ground. That was a celebration of what has been achieved. When I sat in that hall and I saw those young people so proud of who they are and their traditions, coming together and respecting each other, it was the very manifestation of what we need to do as an executive, and that is to deliver. Deliver on building the brighter, united, shared future that I know that we can have, not about denying who we are, but in terms of the celebration through real actions, based on evidence, making a meaningful change in people's lives. Thank you.
thank the Deputy First Minister for that response, and indeed the timeliness of that response as well. Thank you for that. Members, this debate will resume after question time with Kate Nicholl speaking to Wind. Until then, please take your ease, and question time will begin shortly after a change at the top table. Order, members. We now return to the debate on a strategic framework for a shared future, and I call Kate Nicholl to conclude and Wind on the debate on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I rise to wind on this motion, and I want to start by thanking all the speakers for their really considered contributions to this important debate today. Before addressing some of the key aspects raised in the debate, I want to focus on two issues which were briefly touched on by my Alliance Party colleagues in relation to integrated education and shared housing. In relation to integrated education, as my colleague Connie Egan has stated, research from Ulster University has estimated that the total additional cost of maintaining a divided education system at £226 million each year, or over £600,000 every day, clearly shows our divided education system has deep financial costs. But educating our children separately also has societal costs. Our schools should represent the diversity of our society, and integrated education provides the intentionality required to ensure we are building a more inclusive and reconciled society. Harry Harvey is one of my favourite members of the DUP, so it pains me to challenge him, but I didn't agree with anything he said about integrated education. It's not just about people from mixed backgrounds attending a school. It's about so much more than that. It's about an ethos. Not every school is integrated. Integrated schools, there's an intentionality and ethos there. And it gives the children, our children, the chance to build relationships with pupils from different backgrounds, and to appreciate and celebrate both their differences and what they have in common. And that was a theme that was brought out throughout the debate, that it's not about denying our differences, it's about celebrating them and how it enriches us, as the Deputy First Minister said. Alliance believes every child should have the choice and option of attending an integrated school, reducing the cost of division, and playing a crucial role in building a shared future. Increasing the provision of integrated education to meet the demand should be an important part of the strategic framework for a shared future that this motion calls for. And I really appreciated Matthew O'Toole's comments around the cut to funding and the impact that has. Sinead McLaughlin talked about how 7% of schools, actually 8% of schools now, are integrated, and it's just not enough. Moving on to shared housing, my colleague Paula Bradshaw, who moved the motion so well, has already referenced that the lack of this is a major barrier to building a genuinely shared future. Shared housing has recently been moved out of the Executive Office and into the Communities portfolio, forming part of the broader housing brief, which we find concerning. Shared housing must be prioritised, and it cannot be diluted or sidelined any further. It must be given the funding and resources required to ensure it does not get lost or neglected. Where shared housing is developed, it must also be reflective of Northern Ireland in all its diversity. And as Connie said, it's not just about two communities. It's about creating communities which are genuinely reflective and full of the richness of our increasingly diverse society. And we strongly believe that shared housing is a crucial tool in building a shared future, and like integrated education, must form part of a strategic framework for building a shared future. I really liked Mike Nesbitt's contribution, and he mentioned the positivity that exists in this building now, and it feels like there's a genuine commitment to really working together and to collaboration, and I'd like to thank the First Minister and Deputy First Minister for being so committed to this, especially the kind of portrayal to the public, because I think they really need to see it, and I think that the conversation and the debate today has really highlighted that. I really welcomed the points that Carol made about it's not just working class areas where sectarianism exists. I'm not going to name the areas, but as someone who has canvassed in all parts of my constituency and other constituencies, some of the most blatant sectarianism I have witnessed came from very privileged areas where it goes unchecked. So this is a piece of work that we all need to address. In relation to good relations, there's an urgent need to prioritise the allocation of multi-annual funding for the good relations sector's future planning and sustainability. And we've talked a lot about the sector and the work that communities are doing, but they are really hindered by the lack of multi-annual funding and the instability that a lack of stable government also results in. The sector is often the first vulnerable to deep cuts when government budgets are tight. I also want to point out that we need to widen the scope of good relations. We are more than just two communities, and I know from work with minority ethnic communities, this is something that is constantly raised with me. On that, Paula raised racial prejudice and refugee integration, and a constituent of mine, Takura McCurney, had racist graffiti sprayed on his house yesterday. And his only crime was speaking out about racism, which exists in our society. And I had the privilege to work for Anna Lowe when she was an MLA, and Anna always said sectarianism and racism are two sides of the same coin. And we allow it to happen by not calling it out. And I think we all need to do better in challenging the sectarianism and the racism which exists in our society. And quite frankly, it's often the same people who come out talking about this. So I think we all need to do better. Yes?
And I agree with her point about the kind of the bigotry coming from the same well, but would she also be concerned, as I am, that the last stats that I've seen that the racism is actually outstripping sectarianism, so it seems to be even more problematic than maybe some people would even believe?
I completely agree, and I want to pay tribute to you, because every meeting that I go to, town hall meetings on asylum seekers and refugees, you're always there. And yes, I think that there is something that really needs to be addressed, and that's why I welcome work on the racial equality strategy, and I look forward to seeing the results in it. And these can't just be words. We need to have actions. It needs to be monitored. There needs to be data, and we need to have targets that we are working towards. Patrick discussed TBUC and urban villages and the positive developments that they have had. He said he would have liked to see the north-south dimension, and I really liked the take stock perspective that your speech brought, because this really was our intention: how far we have come, but where we need to go. Emma talked about her own politics, and that it was a very important conversation, and I like the line about what you were doing on a Sunday. No one asks that, and we shouldn't. David Honeyford gave such a lovely contribution about Granny Sally, and as Sinead McLaughlin said, it happens with love. I really like that line. Sinead said lots of things that were useful about our society is changing. She talked about new communities, recognizing that for too many people, division is real, and that there is structural segregation, and that is true. The Deputy First Minister apologised for being late, but nobody held that against her, and we're delighted to see the North-South Ministerial Council meet today. She really recognised the work that communities are doing, and I think that's something that we all see in our own constituencies. And it's why the framework is so important, because communities are delivering this, but as an assembly, we shouldn't be hindering it. We should be supporting that work and driving it and doing more around it. So thank you for that. TBUC is under review. She talked about her own identity, culture, how our identity is part of us, and we must respect that in others. and then the different elements that have been successful: urban villages, shared housing, United Youth Programme. So all in all, I thought it was a really positive debate, and I thought the contributions were really worthwhile. I think there is a lot of work that needs to happen still, and we've talked about the multiple areas of work and how it's going to require cross-departmental working. But the tone was very welcome from most people, and I hope that it was taken, that our intention was really just to celebrate our diversity, celebrate that our differences and our different heritages and histories and everything makes us unique and special and different. And as an Assembly, we should be supporting that and working towards a genuinely shared future that we can all enjoy. So thank you.
Thank the member for winding on the debate. Members, the question is that the motion standing on the order paper be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.